Hi, again. It is June 20th, 2020, the 102nd day of the pandemic. And it's been a while since I've done any reading for like public-ish consumption. I've been doing some reading for the 2020-2021 class of AP Lit students, reading on here and sharing with them. I've also just been doing a lot of reading for myself. I don't know. Ebbs and flows, I suppose. Day 102. And back to Eros. Because I know I have got some folks who are reading it, and I'd like to keep reading along with them, but I'd also like to keep providing them with a little bit of read-along opportunity. So we finished last time with a novel sense. I think that's chapter, let's just count, shall we? Chapter 13, maybe chapter 14. Chapter 13. We're going to start with something paradoxical, chapter 14. And I don't know, maybe just read two chapters, because the chapter that comes after that, it's something paradoxical. My page makes love. And then the third chapter that I might have been reading today, called Letters is quite long. So I think I'll probably just do two today, then save Letters for next time, and add on to it a very short chapter that I like a lot, called Folded Meanings, and go from there. So anyway, we'll pick up on chapter 14 and chapter 15. Again, not so helpful because Carson does not designate chapters that way, but I'll read something paradoxical, and my page makes love today. Since it's been a minute for me, and perhaps you, whoever you are, listening or not, I'm going to back up and lean into Anne Carson's the wovenness of Anne Carson's narrative, and read the last couple of paragraphs of the previous chapter, A Novel Sense. And that will lead us into this chapter to come. So, starting on page 81 for anyone reading along. In the bittersweetness of the exercise, we see the outline of Eros. You love Zeno and you hate him. You know there is a ruse operating in his paradoxes, yet you keep going back over them. And you keep going back to the paradoxes not because you would like to see Achilles overtake the tortoise, but because you like trying to understand what kind of thing a paradox is. You like being situated at that blind but lively point where your reason is viewing itself, or almost viewing itself. Why? We've come round to this blind point before when contemplating Velázquez's Las Meninas and considering the paradoxical action at the heart of metaphor. Novels give us another and broader access onto the blind point, for they sustain the experience of paradox over many pages by means of many ruses. Let us see what we can read from the ruses of the novelists about the blind point and its desirability. Something paradoxical. Critics of the novel find paradox to be a principle of the genre, and note the frequency with which the romances speak of situations as new and strange, kainos, or against reason, paralogos, or unthought of, adoketos. Techniques of paradox enrich these stories at all levels of plot, imagery, and wordplay. Paradox is especially essential to their emotional texture. This can surprise no one familiar with the lyric precedents of erotic fiction. I'm crazy, I'm not crazy, I'm in love, I'm not in love, said Anacreon in the 6th century. I don't know what I should do. two states of mind in me, said Sappho. Characters in novels luxuriate in such moments of emotional schizophrenia, when the personality is split into two warring factions. Novelists expand these moments into full-scale soliloquies of the soul, so that a character may debate his erotic dilemma with himself, usually at length and to no purpose. But emotional schism is not the exclusive property of heroes and heroines in novels. All who observe their fortunes, within and without the text, are programmed to respond in this way. Take, for example, the ending of Xenophon's Aphisiaca. As the heroine Anthea falls into her lover's arms, the townspeople standing around are stirred by pleasure, pain, fear, memory of the past, apprehension of the future, and all mixing in their souls. So too, at the end of Heliodorus's Aethiopica, the lovers' union is witnessed by their fellow citizens, in whom absolute contrarieties were fitted together as one sound. Joy interwoven with grief, tears mixed with laughter, total gloom turning into festive delight. Earlier in Heliodorus's novel, a certain character named Calasiris records his reaction to the erotic sufferings of the heroine. At the same time, I was filled with pleasure and pain. I found myself in quite a novel state of mind, weeping and rejoicing simultaneously. As readers, we too are meant to feel this paradoxical mix of feelings, if the novelist is in proper command of his ruses. So Carson implies when he turns to us, at a particularly brilliant moment in the action of his plot, and demands, "What poet ever produced such a paradoxical scenario on the stage? You must have thought you were sitting in the theater filled with a thousand emotions, all at the same time. Tears, joy, amazement, pity, disbelief, fervent prayers. To create pleasure and pain at once is the novelist's aim. We should dwell on this moment for a moment. We should dwell on this point for a moment. It is of some importance that, as readers, we are typically and repeatedly drawn into a conflicted emotional response, which approximates that of the lover's soul divided by desire. Readership itself affords the aesthetic distance and obliquity necessary for this response. The reader's emotions begin from a privileged position of knowledge. We know the story will end happily. The characters within the story do not seem to know this. So we stand at an angle to the text from which we can see both the narrated facts of the case and also what the characters believe to be the facts of the case. Two levels of narrative reality float one upon another, without converging, and provide for the reader that moment of emotional and cognitive stereoscopy, which is also the experience of the desiring lover. I'm going to read that again. Two levels of narrative reality float one upon another, without converging, and provide for the reader that moment of emotional and cognitive stereoscopy, which is also the experience of a desiring lover. It's an interesting visual, because it is not a triangle, although it's pointing to triangles. It's two lines, and they seem to be parallel. I love Carson. We saw Sappho construct this stereoscopic moment in fragment 31, here we go, triangles, as a three-point circuit of desire, joining herself, her beloved, and the man who listens closely. The verbal action of Eros in fragment 31 allows our perception to jump or shift from one level of desire to another, from actual to possible, without losing sight of the difference between them. In Sappho's poem, the shift of view is momentary, a vertigo, and sudden sense of being very close to the core where feelings form. In the novel, this technique of shifting distance is taken over as the permanent attitude from which the reader views the action. Novels institutionalize the ruse of Eros. It becomes a narrative texture of sustained incongruence, emotional and cognitive. It permits the reader to stand in triangular relation to the characters in the story and reach into the text after the objects of their desire, sharing their longing, but also detached from it, seeing their view of reality, but also its mistakenness. It is almost like being in love. Chapter 15. My page makes love. A few examples are in order. The novelist Longus, 2nd to 3rd century AD, prefaces his novel Daphnis and Chloe with a bold statement of the triangular tension, that is, its structure and its raison d'etre. He was moved to write the tale, he tells us, because he encountered a painted image of the history of Eros that struck him as the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Longing seized him to create a rival image in writing, and he set to work on the novel. There are 3 components in Longus's opening conceit. There is the painted icon of Eros, an object of ideal beauty, transcending all the actual beauty of woods and waters around it, Longus says. There is the verbal icon, the novel itself, reaching out to rival or to approximate the perfect beauty of the painting in an act of writing. In between the ideal and the rival icon is the motive force of desire that impels Longus to try to bring these 2 heterogeneous images together on the screen of imagination. The 2 icons are like 2 parts of a metaphor, an already existing image or sense and a novel image or sense are brought close by an act of examination. Together, they compose one meaning. Longus's imaginative effort, like the verbal innovation that we call metaphor, is an erotic action, reaching out from what is known and present to something else, something different, something desired. The meaning he composes is a dynamic meaning, not a still point, that comes alive as the novel shifts from plane to plane of its various triangles. So we've gone from triangles to definitely pyramids. Something paradoxical is inherent in these shifts, and as readers, we are invited into its experience, standing on the edge of other people's desire, arrested, wooed, triangulated, and changed by a series of marks on a piece of paper. My page makes love and understands it feelingly, says Montaigne. Longus's page makes love to the reader, first and obviously, by drawing him into the bittersweet emotion of lovers in the story. But this narrative voyeurism is only the surface. A much more arresting act of love is going on at depth, in the whole metaphorical undertaking of setting one icon against another. Daphnis and Chloe is the story of a boy and girl discovering Eros. Everything they do and say sounds symbolic. All lovers believe they are inventing love. Daphnis and Chloe actually do invent love. They live in a pastoral wonderland, swell to desire with the buds of spring, and after many discouragements, marry one another on the last pages in a cave of Eros. They are, as one critic puts it, emblematic innocence in emblematic predicaments, undergoing an emblematic growth in erotic knowledge. Here, for example, is what happens when Daphnis wins her father's consent to marry Chloe and rushes out to tell her the news. The lovers find themselves in an orchard rich with fruit trees. There stood one apple tree whose apples had all been gathered. It had neither fruit nor leaf. All the boughs were bare, and a single apple floated on the very top of the topmost boughs, big and beautiful and more fragrant in itself than many others. The apple picker was afraid to go up so high, or he overlooked it, and perhaps that beautiful apple was saving itself for a shepherd in love. I hope we're hearing echoes of the reach from that chapter. Daphnis is eager to pick the apple. Chloe forbids him. Daphnis picks the apple. To mollify Chloe, he then says, "O maiden, beautiful seasons begot this apple. A beautiful tree nourished it in the ripening sun, and fortune kept close watch. Having eyes, I could not let it be. It might have fallen to the ground and been trampled by grazing flocks, or poisoned by some creeping creature, or used up by time as it waited there, gazed at, object of praise. This was the prize Aphrodite won for beauty. This I give to you as victory prize." Daphnis drops the apple in Chloe's lap. She kisses him, and so Daphnis repented not at all of having dared to go up so high. Daphnis is a lover who takes literary motifs literally. Here he woos his beloved with the very symbol of wooing, and acts out the paradigmatic reach of desire. Longus expects you to recognize the high apple on the highest branch from Sappho's poem, and to read Daphnis's action as emblematic. At the time, the apple is typical of all love gifts, well known throughout Greek poetry, and visual art as the favorite offering of lover to beloved. The apple's traditional association with Aphrodite and the judgment of Paris is another strand of erotic symbolization, evoked here by Daphnis himself. And the apple might be thought to represent Chloe as bride, blooming in the wild and soon to be plucked for marriage. The respective attitudes of lover and beloved are stereotypical too. Irrepressible desire meets adamant resistance. He insists, she submits. The apple is the loser. These various levels of inference float upon the essential narrative fact. It is a real apple and wins a real kiss, or so we read. Longus's novel is a continuous fabric of such levels, held in rich and transparent suspension against the facts of the plot, like the apple as it floats upon the tree. Look closer for a moment at this apple in Longus's text. Longus has chosen a somewhat curious verb with which to suspend the apple from the tree. Apeteto is from petomai, the verb to fly. It is generally used of creatures with wings or of emotions that swoop through the heart. Especially frequent of erotic emotion, this verb is used, for example, by Sappho in 31 to say that Eros puts the heart in my chest on wings, or makes my heart fly. Here, Longus puts the verb in the imperfect tense. That is, he stalls the action of the verb in time. The imperfect expresses continuity. So that, like the arrow in Zeno's paradox, the apple flies while standing still. Moreover, the sentence in which the apple flies is a sentence floating in paradoxical, paratactic relation to the sentences before it. The relation is paratactic because the connective joining this sentence to the text is simply and, kai. The relation is paradoxical because the statement, and one apple was floating, is a flat contradiction of the three foregoing statements which tell us that the tree had been picked clean. Neither fruit nor leaf remained. Every single branch was bare. Translators of Longus invariably change his and to a but, so that the impertinent apple darts out suddenly into your grammatical purview from an adversative clause. But Longus's aim is not so ordinary. His grammar intercepts your complacent purview and splits it in half. On the one hand, you see a tree picked bare. On the other hand, an apple floats. And the relation between them is something paradoxical. Longus's and places you at a blind point from which you see more than is literally there. Longus expects a lot from his reader. The privileged position of knowledge you enjoy as you read Daphnis and Chloe does not simply rest on believing things will end well. Longus assumes and plays upon the whole history of erotic topoi and grammatical acumen available to a literate audience. He wishes to give you a sustained experience of that register of mental activity, metaphor, which best approximates Eros. Think how it feels. As you read the novel, your mind shifts from the level of characters, episodes, and clues to the level of ideas, solutions, exegesis. The activity is delightful, but also one of pain. Each shift is accompanied by a sharp sense that something is being lost or has already been lost. Exegesis mars and disrupts pure absorption in the narrative. The narrative insists on distracting your attention Sorry, my computer's screen went dark. Damn it. This is such a good paragraph. Exegesis mars and disrupts pure absorption in the narrative. The narrative insists on distracting your attention from exegesis. Yet your mind is unwilling to let go of either level of activity and remains arrested at a point of stereoscopy between the two. They compose one meaning. The novelist who constructs this moment of emotional and cognitive interception is making love, and you are the object of his wooing. The book and its author was our pimp, cries Francesca in hell, or so we read in Inferno. Okay, not reading any more today. I was about to say, I can't end every video by saying how much I love Ann Carson and how amazing she is. But maybe I can end every video saying that, because she's awesome and so smart. She's teaching us about exegesis while she expects us to be engaged in exegesis. It's just really, she's so smart. She's doing all the grammatical work that she's describing these novelists doing. Anyway, more Ann Carson sometime. Day 102 of the pandemic. The world is opening back up. Too soon. In Georgia, our cases had fallen, but they're rising, and they are soon to overtake their height. We're in the midst of important, essential, dramatic moments of protest and, dare I say, revolution? I hope. And still and always there is room for more of this. So more next time. Until then.